Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so sort of just to recapitulate briefly what we covered last time. So this first chapter of the Manual of Abhidhamma is dealing with the topic of Cheetah, different states of mind. And if you remember, the manual divides the spheres of Cheetah, the spheres of consciousness, into four. And then the first of these, which we're still on the first of these, that is the types of sense sphere consciousness, the kinds of consciousness that are typical of, or that hang around in the sense sphere realm of existence, which is the lowest of the three realms of existence. And so the Abhidhamma, this Abhidhamma system distinguishes 54 types of Cheetahs that are typical of the sense sphere. And then these are divided. The first class that it deals with is the unwholesome consciousness. And there are 12 types of unwholesome consciousness. 8 rooted in greed. So you could see these 8 rooted in greed here, distinguished by way of whether they're associated with joyful feeling or neutral feeling, whether they are accompanied by wrong view or disconnected from wrong view, and then whether they're prompted or spontaneous. Okay, then we have 2 types of consciousness which are rooted in hatred. Both are associated with displeasure, with unpleasant mental feeling. And so they're only distinguished whether they're spontaneous or prompted. And then we have 2 types of consciousness, or 2 Cheetahs, that are strongly rooted in delusion. Delusion, as I said last time, is present in all the unwholesome kinds of consciousness. But there are 2 kinds in which greed is absent, hatred is absent, and delusion just stands out on its own. So one of these is associated with doubt, and then the other is associated with strong restlessness or agitation. Okay, then after we went through the unwholesome consciousness, now we're coming to the types of rootless consciousness. So these types of rootless consciousness are not wholesome, not unwholesome. They are karmically neutral. And of the 18 types, there are 7 that are the results of unwholesome karma. Those are called unwholesome resultant consciousness. The 5 types of sense consciousness, the receiving consciousness, and the investigating consciousness. Then the wholesome resultants, there are 8, the same kinds as the 7 unwholesome resultants, except that the investigating consciousness is divided into 2 kinds. If there's an extremely desirable or agreeable object, then the investigating consciousness is associated with a joyful feeling. If it's just a moderately agreeable object, then the investigating consciousness is accompanied by equanimity or the neutral feeling. So those are the types of resultant rootless consciousness. And now we come to 3 kinds of rootless consciousness that are not karmically resultant. These are called, I use the translation, or earlier translators used the translation, functional. The Pali word for this type of consciousness is kriya. Kriya, literally it means doing. So this kind of consciousness, it performs a function, but the function is not wholesome, not unwholesome, not resultant. I compare this, I was just thinking of an analogy for this kind of kriya function. It's a little bit like when you start your computer, like the first screen that comes up is for the password. At least I use Microsoft Word. So a screen comes up, so you put your password in. You know, at first you're not able to access websites, documents, programs, anything. All you have to do is you put your sort of that bare function of putting in your password and clicking enter, and then you enter. Then you can start doing things with the computer. So this is a little bit like the functional types of consciousness here, these rootless functional consciousness. They just have functions to perform in the process of cognition. Okay, to understand these functions, at least some of them, let's go back to that table that we had last time on page 155. Okay, the table shows the complete eye door process. And this process is the same for all the 5 physical sense doors, whether it's ear, nose, tongue, or the physical body. The sequence is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is in position number 5. Okay, at the very beginning of the actual process, after this bhavanga, the bhavanga is sort of the stream of subliminal, or almost like the unconscious. It's a little bit like the bhavanga, a little bit like the alaya vijnana in Yogacara. So it's that deep, flowing, subconscious or subliminal consciousness. Okay, when that is cut off, the first Cheetah that arises is called the 5-door inverting consciousness. Remember I explained that or illustrated that last time? It's like the person who's in this room with 5 doors and somebody comes knocking and they have to figure out what door are they knocking at. So that Cheetah has the function of turning to the particular sense door where an object has come knocking. So what's going on? What is the door that they're knocking on? So this is one type of functional consciousness, the 5-door inverting consciousness. Okay, the second one is called the mind door inverting consciousness. And that is, I believe, on page 166. The diagram is on 166. Okay, this diagram is showing the process that takes place not when an external sense object comes knocking at one of the physical sense doors, but rather when a mental object appears at the mind door. So there are times when we're not seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. In fact, most of the time, probably, ideas and thoughts and mental objects are occurring. And so those types of process that are occurring through the mind door, not the physical sense doors, those are called mind door processes. Okay, and here just taking the example where there's an object appears clearly at the mind door. Okay, we have those initial moments of the bhavanga, the subliminal flow. Then comes a Cheetah, which turns to the object at the mind door. That is called the mind door inverting consciousness. And that is a functional type of consciousness. Is this getting too difficult? To digest this takes time. I mean, I had to struggle with it at the beginning when I first learned it many years ago, too. Okay, so at the physical sense doors, we have the 5-door inverting consciousness. At the mind door, when we are considering an idea, a concept, a judgment, reflecting inwardly, there is a Cheetah that arises and just turns to the mental object. So that is called the mind door inverting consciousness. It just for one split second exercises that function of turning to the object at the mind door. So that is a functional type of consciousness. Okay, the third rootless the third type of rootless functional consciousness, which we're back to page 44, is called the smile-producing consciousness. And it's accompanied by joy. But don't think it's any smile-producing consciousness. But according to the explanation, it says, this is a Cheetah peculiar to arahants, including Buddhas and Pratyeka Buddhas, who are also top types of arahants, and his function is to cause arahants to smile about sense sphere phenomena. There are certain mysteries in the Abhidhamma that I've never figured out after more than 40 years. This is one of them. I don't know why this Cheetah got put in, but it's there, so I have to at least take account of it. But it's not the only Cheetah that causes arahats, Buddhas to smile. But most of the time, it will be, when they smile, it's because of one of the 4 beautiful sense sphere functional Cheetahs. But this is a rootless Cheetah. Yeah, I don't know the reason for it. And I haven't really found a good explanation, but it's just there. So, don't lose any sleep over it. Okay, so we have altogether, now just the summary verse. We have the summary verse is just stating that there are 18 types of rootless consciousness. So we had the 7 unwholesome resultants, And remember, unwholesome resultant means a result of the unwholesome. It doesn't mean a result that is unwholesome. The results are not wholesome, not unwholesome, but they result, in this case, from the unwholesome. And then there are 8 that result that are wholesome resultants, that are the results of past wholesome karma. And then there are the 3 functionals, the 3 rootless functionals, 5-door adverting, mind-door adverting, and smile, the arahat's smiling consciousness. Okay, so that finishes up really what I intended to cover last time. Now we come into the new material. So now we've finished the unwholesome cheetahs. We finished the rootless cheetahs. Now we come to the broad category. This is a very broad category. All of the other cheetahs in the Abhidhamma system are called beautiful cheetahs, beautiful states of consciousness. So we have 12 unwholesome, 18 rootless, that's 30. And so if we take 89 cheetahs, so we have 59 beautiful states of consciousness. So the beautiful in the Abhidhamma really far outnumbers the unwholesome and the rootless. Okay, and of these 59, later we'll come to the 91. Okay, we turn the page to page 46. We have 24 are sense sphere beautiful cheetahs. So these are beautiful cheetahs that pertain to, that hang out at, that hang around in the sense sphere of existence. And of these 24 sense sphere beautiful types of consciousness, 8 are wholesome, 8 are resultants, and 8 are functionals. And you'll see that the 8 of each class are virtually identical in their descriptions. So let's first take the sense sphere wholesome types of consciousness. And I'll read in Pali, then you can read after me. Somanasa sahagatang, jnana sampayutang, asankarikang, ekang, somanasa sahagatang, jnana sampayutang, sasankarikang, ekang, somanasa sahagatang, jnana vipayutang, asankarikam mikang, somanasa sahagatang, jnana vipayutang, sasankarikam mikang, upeka sahagatang, jnana sampayutang, asankarikam ekang, upeka sahagatang, jnana sampayutang, sasankarikam ekang, upeka sahagatang, jnana vipayutang, asankarikam ekang, upeka sahagatang, jnana vipayutang, sasankarikam ekang. Okay, so then looking at the translation, so we have first, you could see we have 4 cheetahs. These are wholesome cheetahs accompanied by joy. somanassa, by that joyful feeling. And these are, of these four, two are associated with knowledge, two are dissociated from knowledge. And then of the pairs, the two pairs, they are distinguished as either unprompted or spontaneous, or prompted. Prompted means either I have to persuade myself to do something wholesome, or somebody else persuades me, puts pressure on me, convinces me, threatens me, threatens me. Okay, and then the numbers 5 to 8 are in all respects the same as the first four, differing only in regard to the feeling that accompanies those cheetahs. In the case of 5 to 8, the feeling that accompanies them is what's called upekkha, neutral feeling, rather than joyful feeling. Okay, now what's meant by knowledge here, and this is a bit, to my way of thinking, a bit problematic, because if we think of knowledge as any type of knowledge, scientific knowledge, historical knowledge, knowledge of matters of fact, knowing the address of the Berkeley Buddhist monastery, or knowing my friend's email address, then it gives questions like, what makes that consciousness wholesome? So I think, as I said earlier, we have to say that the Abhidhamma is not intended to establish a scheme that could cover all possible states of consciousness, but rather it's sort of formulated and designed with the aim, call it the ethical and spiritual aims of the Buddha's path. So what is meant by knowledge here would be some kind of spiritual understanding. It can be from simply understanding something about the workings of the law of karma, or understanding the benefits of wholesome conduct, understanding the benefits of meditation, and then going deeper and deeper to the point of getting into real, penetrative wisdom that understands the true nature of things. So when it comes to questions, how do you fit scientific knowledge, historical knowledge, knowledge of matters of fact into the Abhidhamma? I mean, for many years that question used to come up, and it used to puzzle me and perplex me. And then a few years ago, I'm a slow learner, I came to the conclusion that it's just taking a wrong perspective on what the Abhidhamma is intended to do. So here, what is meant is some kind of moral or spiritual knowledge relating to one's ethical behavior and one's spiritual cultivation. Okay, so it's said that certain states of consciousness are accompanied by that knowledge, and other states of consciousness, the four other cheetahs, are jnana vipayuta. They are disconnected, dissociated from knowledge. But when we say that they're dissociated from knowledge, this doesn't mean that those states of consciousness are accompanied by ignorance or delusion. Because ignorance or delusion is an unwholesome mental factor. So ignorance or delusion is actively present only in unwholesome states of consciousness. In the wholesome states of consciousness, ignorance is never present. But those wholesome states of consciousness, some will be associated with this understanding, some kind of moral or spiritual understanding. Others will be dissociated from that understanding. And maybe to make that a little bit clear, I have some examples on page 48. Okay, to illustrate the first Cheetah, we have someone joyfully performs a deed of giving, of generosity, understanding that this is a wholesome deed, and then they do it spontaneously because they enjoy giving. They feel happiness when they give. Okay, somebody else performs the same good deed, again with understanding, but in this case they have to do it with deliberation. Maybe initially they're reluctant to give. I don't want to give, I'll be putting myself into trouble. But then they think, oh, the Buddha's texts say that generosity is a great virtue, it's a paramita, it's a basis of merit. Or one listens to a Dharma discourse, and then the preacher says, you should practice giving, and in that way you overcome your reluctance to give, and through that prompting, then you make a gift. Okay, then somebody else joyfully performs a generous deed without prompting, but without understanding. And maybe to give an example of this, something that I experienced many times in Sri Lanka, when going on alms round to the houses, like the family that comes out, they'll come out with some rice and some prepared dishes, and often if they have like a little child, they'll tell a little child to put the spoon in the child's hand and have the child spoon out the food and put it into the alms bowl. And so the child doesn't know what they're doing, but the parents are saying, give to the monk, give to the monk. And so the child will do it, often joyfully, sort of laughing, sometimes with just a straight face. And then the Abhidhamma maybe doesn't take account of this, but sometimes they're weeping and wailing. Why? Give. And then another thing you see is that, with the parents, when the monastics go on alms round or at some public functions, if they have the little child, they'll say to the child, bow down to the monk, bow down to the monk, and then the child will bow down. They don't know what they're doing, it's so without knowledge, without understanding, but I guess it's considered a wholesome state of mind. Or maybe even to give see if this will work. Like nowadays, sometimes Buddhist teachers get invited to a high school class or high school. They want the teacher to give some instructions on meditation to the students. And so the students might not have any idea why they're doing this meditation, what the value will be, but they do it. And so they're doing it it would be a wholesome state of mind, but it's detached from knowledge. And maybe it's done with prompting, because the teacher is sort of telling them you have to do that.
So this knowledge or understanding, this is distinct from wisdom, or could they overlap?
I'm using the word understanding because it's a broader term, but that understanding will shade off into wisdom. So technically, like in the Abhidhamma way it will say that which is called knowledge, understanding, wisdom, insight, non-delusion, comprehension, clear comprehension. What are some other words? They'll say that these are all one in meaning, the words are only different. But the jnana here, it doesn't necessarily have to be that higher wisdom, but there are just like stages or gradations from one to the other. but technically they're the same, considered the same mental factor, just functioning in different contexts and different modes. Okay, so those are the 8 types of wholesome consciousness. And now, this is also an important point about them. All of the wholesome states of consciousness have roots. They're, using the Pali word there, sa-hetuka. Sa means with, hetu means root. So they are with roots. But these 8 types of consciousness, these 8 cheetahs, can be distinguished as to whether they have 3 roots or 2 roots. Which cheetahs will have 3 roots? Okay, what are the 3 wholesome roots? Okay, first, what are the 3 wholesome roots? Non-greed. Right. Non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And so how many roots now? 3. Because what's called knowledge, understanding, wisdom is, again, it's another modality of the root non-delusion. So in all of the wholesome cheetahs, there's necessarily non-greed and non-hatred. And then of these 8, 4 of them also have non-delusion. Non-delusion here is what is called knowledge or understanding. Then the 4 that are disassociated with knowledge, they have only 2 roots. They have non-greed, non-hatred, but not non-delusion. And so it's important to try to generate states of wholesome consciousness that have knowledge or non-delusion. For example, if you're studying a Dharma text, you want to be able to understand it. If you just read it or just recite it mechanically, you might say it's a wholesome state of consciousness because you have trust in the Dharma, and so you're reciting out of your trust or faith, but you also want to get that knowledge or understanding. And maybe what's too common in the Buddhist world today is that lots of people have the cheetahs jnana vipayuta. So they go through worshipping the Buddha. Why do you worship the Buddha? I don't know. You take the precepts. I abstain from taking life, abstain from stealing. Why are you taking the precepts? What are the benefits? Don't know. The teacher said take them. Yeah.
Does that also include knowing what mantras mean? Not just sutras, but what you recite in mantras?
That's a good question. Because mantras, and at least a lot of the mantras don't have what you call conceptual meaning. They're made of just particles of words. Maybe so you should understand maybe the reason or purpose underlying the mantra, but maybe because not necessarily the meaning of the syllables. Yeah.
I was wondering, looking at this section, there seems to be almost like 3 things associated with delusion or knowledge. So there's delusion, there's not delusion present, and then there's non-delusion, which is not delusion present, but non-delusion, which is a whole nother experience of which is knowledge, and then not knowledge present or not non-delusion. Sorry, I don't know if that made any sense.
It sounded like you covered more things than 3.
Well, maybe there's 4. There's maybe, it seemed like before I was just thinking that there's 2 things. You either have knowledge or you have delusion.
Yeah.
But this one seems to have maybe 4 things.
In these 8?
Yeah, no, and because looking at the unwholesome ones as well, there's you can have a state where you don't have delusion,
yeah,
but you don't actually have knowledge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not a binary.
It's not binary. Yeah.
Okay. So non-delusion doesn't just mean you don't have delusion. It actually means you have knowledge.
Non-delusion is actually a negative way of expressing a positive quality. The positive quality is some understanding, even going up to the highest wisdom.
Okay.
Yeah, so we could say that there are states of consciousness with delusion. All the 12 unwholesome cheetahs have delusion. Then the rootless cheetahs don't have delusion, they don't have delusion, and they don't have knowledge or understanding. Then these wholesome states of consciousness, 4 of them have knowledge and understanding, 4 of them are dissociated from knowledge. Okay, so those are the 8 wholesome types of consciousness. Now we come to the 8 kinds of sense-sphere resultant consciousness, and you can see, we don't have to recite them because we've already recited, the formulas are the same. So you could see that the descriptions are exactly the same as those for the 8 kinds of wholesome consciousness. So where is the difference? The difference is in the function of those states of consciousness. The 8 kinds of wholesome consciousness create karma. Those are the states of consciousness that create wholesome karma. And the wholesome karma is also what we call merit. In Pali, we have the word punya. In Sanskrit, the pronunciation is the same, punya. In Chinese, they use the character fu, which is meaning fortune. I think, as I said the other day, it's a little bit misleading, since it's not, the fortune is the result, the good things that happen as a result. But this is actually what one is creating are the causes for good fortune. The causes for happiness in the future. Okay, and when the wholesome karma ripens, when it produces its result, the results take the form of the 8 kinds of sense-sphere resultant consciousness. These beautiful resultant consciousness. And these kinds of consciousness, they're described as, if you look at the Pali portion, sahetuka kama vachara vipaka chitani. Sahetuka, they have roots. They have the roots of non-greed, non-hatred, and 4 of them will have the root of non-delusion. 4 won't have non-delusion. So they are rooted in either 2 or 3 beautiful roots. But their function differs from that of the wholesome types of consciousness. The wholesome types create karma. The sense-sphere resultant consciousness with roots experiences the results of that karma. And the primary way this kind of consciousness experiences the result is by becoming the subliminal consciousness in the next existence or some existence after that. The consciousness, we call this the rebirth consciousness, which then takes on the function of that deep subconscious flow, which serves as the basic mode of consciousness of a person in that existence. So we are human beings. I think we're all human beings. Anybody here who's not a human being? I mean, sometimes the peacock could come into the classroom. Is there a dog? There is. I see. Okay, so it should have. It hasn't missed a class. Okay. Okay. Okay, so human existence occurs as the result of wholesome karma. So our sort of basic mode of our rebirth consciousness, the consciousness that's sort of flowing deep at the base of our minds, that will be a resultant consciousness, a wholesome, a sense sphere resultant consciousness resulting from wholesome karma in the past. And hopefully, in our resultant consciousness, we have the three-rooted wholesome consciousness. I say hopefully, we don't know for everybody, but it's when the resultant consciousness has that root of knowledge or non-delusion, it means that it understands things quickly or easily. Whereas somebody who is lacking that root of understanding or knowledge, whose rebirth consciousness is dissociated from knowledge, they have a more difficult time understanding. But don't think if you have a difficult time understanding the Abhidhamma. Like, don't go home and say, and think to yourself, I didn't understand a thing he said. Poor me, I must have, my rebirth consciousness must be dissociated from knowledge. Because people understand different things easily. And Abhidhamma is a difficult subject. But especially when we're studying the Dharma in this life, when we contact the Dharma in this life, we want to invest a lot of time in studying the Dharma, learning it well, learning the basic principles, getting them imprinted on the mind. Because when we're doing that and then meditating on those principles, when we're doing that, then we are creating wholesome cheetahs accompanied by knowledge. And in that way, we're laying the foundation for having a rebirth consciousness that's going to be in the next life that will be accompanied by knowledge. Okay, so that takes care of the 8 types of sense sphere resultant consciousness. The 8 kinds of beautiful sense sphere resultant consciousness. Now remember, and this is an interesting point, in the previous section, when we were dealing with the rootless consciousness, this was on page 41, so the Pali is on 41, continuing into 42. There were 8 types of wholesome resultant consciousness without roots, 8 types of rootless resultant consciousness. And now we have 8 types of resultant consciousness accompanied by roots. So altogether, there are 16 types of sense sphere wholesome resultant consciousness. But the kinds of resultant consciousness accompanied by roots, the resultant consciousness, those are stronger types of consciousness than the rootless. It's a bit like, well, the commentaries use this simile of certain kinds of plants that grow up maybe like algae or moss that don't have roots, And so they're easy to remove them. You know, if something just brushes up against them, or little types of, I don't know, little grasses that grow in South Asia without real roots, they get easily swept away. But trees that have roots can't remove them very easily, because the roots, they anchor the tree in the ground and they stabilize it. And so the cheetahs, or states of mind that have roots, are strong and firm. And notice also, this is interesting and sometimes a puzzling point. People brings up questions that the unwholesome resultants never have roots. There are only 7 unwholesome resultants, and they're all rootless. There are no unwholesome resultants with roots. And when I first learned the Abhidhamma many, many years ago, then I asked my teacher about that, and he said the reason is that even though it seems that the unwholesome cheetahs can be very strong, you know, all of the wars, the killing, the robberies, sexual exploitation, and so on, all is coming from unwholesome kinds of consciousness. So it seems in fact, so much violence and destruction in the world. So it seems that the unwholesome cheetahs must be very strong. But in terms of their capacity to produce results, my teacher said that capacity is relatively weak. Whereas the wholesome cheetahs, though we have to cultivate them with a lot of effort, but when they produce their results, the results can have roots. Maybe that's the reason why they have roots, because it takes effort to cultivate them, whereas the unwholesome kinds of consciousness usually arise very naturally in people. And so it doesn't require that much exertion to generate unwholesome consciousness. Okay, now we come to what are called these types of sense sphere functional consciousness with roots. And these, again, if you look at the descriptions, they're exactly the same as the description of the wholesome consciousness and the resultant consciousness. The only difference is that these are called functional. And what makes these functional? These are the kinds of consciousness that arise in the minds of arahants. And here by arahants, it also includes the Buddhas and Pacceka Buddhas. The Pacceka Buddhas are the Sanskrit Pratyeka Buddhas, sometimes called the solitary Buddhas or silent Buddhas. So technically all three, whether the Shravaka Arahats, Pratyeka Buddha Arahats, or Buddhas, are Arhats in the sense that they have destroyed all defilements. And now when all defilements have been destroyed, then one's actions, we could say that they're beautiful actions, but technically they're not called wholesome actions. Because in the Abhidhamma language, wholesome means that which creates wholesome karma. And the actions of the Buddhas and the Arahats don't create any karma. So they think, for example, of other living beings with loving kindness and compassion. Their conduct will always conform to the silas, to the principles of moral observance. They'll go into deep states of meditation. They'll teach the Dharma. But their cheetahs are not creating wholesome karma. And so those cheetahs, they look just like the cheetahs of an ordinary person creating wholesome karma. But the Cheetah has that difference that it's just performing the function but not creating the karma. So the Dhammapada compares the actions to the arhats. It's like, in the case of an ordinary person, it's like an animal, like a rabbit, running across the sand, or a fox walking across the dog walking across the sand, or a deer walking across the mud. It leaves footprints. But the actions of the arhats are said to be like birds crossing the sky. So when the bird crosses the sky, you can't look up, later after the bird is gone and say, what kind of bird crossed the sky? With the case of the tracks on the mud, you can look, it's a deer, it's a peacock, or a squirrel, or a dog, or are there bears here? You see bears also. I better stay indoors at night. What?
Up in the mountain now.
Oh, not down here. Okay. Okay, so those are the 8 kinds of functional consciousness of the arhats. Okay, so now we could just look at the verse summing up. Or maybe skipping over the verses, we could go to the guide to number 17. Now we're taking a summary of the different kinds of sense sphere consciousness. Okay, so first, if you remember, we have a distinction by way of kind. And so we have the wholesome, the great wholesome. So we have the 8 that we've just went over. Then we have the 12 unwholesome. The 12 unwholesome, how many rooted in greed? 8 rooted in greed, 2 rooted in hatred, 2 rooted in delusion. Then we have 23 resultants. So 7 are the results of the unwholesome. 8 are the rootless wholesome resultants. And then we have these 8 beautiful wholesome resultants. So altogether, 23 kinds of resultant consciousness. And then we have the 11 kinds of functional or Kriya Cheetahs. So we have the 3 that are rootless. Again, the 3 rootless kinds. 5 sense door adverting consciousness, mind door adverting consciousness, and then we have the 8 great functionals. Those are the cheetahs that arise in the minds of the arahats. So we have 8 and 12, that's 20. Then 23 resultants, that's 43. And then 11 functionals, so we have 54. So that's the 54 kinds of sense sphere consciousness. Okay, at this point I'll ask whether there's any questions on the kinds of sense sphere consciousness. Don't be shy about asking questions.
Functional Cheetah, is that built-in or is that...
Wait, take the microphone.
Is the functional Cheetah, is that built-in in each individual or is part of characters?
I didn't...
The functional Cheetah.
Yeah.
Is that built-in ourselves or part of our nature?
Built in ourselves?
Or part of our characters?
Part of characters.
It's functional, right? Is that built-in? It's kind of, each one of us have that kind of functional...
Yeah, we each will have 2 of the different functional types of consciousness. We will all have the 5 door adverting and the mind door adverting. Because we're always, either seeing things, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. In that case, it's always preceded by the 5 door adverting. Then when we're thinking about something, then there's the mind door adverting. So we all have those two types of functional consciousness. The smiling that rootless smiling consciousness, that's supposed to be only for the arhats. We smile, but we smile with either the greed-rooted consciousness accompanied by joy, or the beautiful consciousness accompanied by joy. And then the 8 types of beautiful functional consciousness, those only arise in arhats. So not in other people. Okay, Laura?
Is it possible to say that the 8 wholesome, beautiful chittas are related to the 8 resultant chittas? Almost like in terms of time? Like if that the wholesome creates merit or the conditions for future good karma, and then later you experience the results of those.
Yeah.
Is there correlation?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. In fact, later, I'm not sure that I'll get into this in this course, but the 8 beautiful resultant types, the 8 beautiful resultant chittas, are the results of the 8 kinds of wholesome chittas, but with one exception, which I don't want to get into now. The resultants don't appear in this life itself. Yeah, so they're not resultants ripening in this life, but the wholesome chittas that we generate now, those come to fruition in the form of rebirth that one takes in the next existence, or in some cases it can be even in later existences. Yeah, but the wholesome karma, I should say, the unwholesome chittas and the beautiful wholesome chittas will produce results in this life in the form of the rootless chittas. Yeah, they can produce results in the form of the rootless chittas. But the rooted chittas, generally they take the form of the rebirth consciousness. But there is one exception to that, rather technical, too technical a point to go into now. Yes, please. Oh, I answered. Okay.
Well, you were close to answering my question too. I just want to make sure. So there is karma that can ripen within our lifetime.
Oh, definitely.
But the Abhidhamma is talking about a rebirth type of karma. In other words, it doesn't ripen in this lifetime.
Certainly, I wouldn't say that the Abhidhamma says that karma can't ripen in this life. Yeah, karma can ripen in this life. It can ripen in future lives. But what I said is that the wholesome types of karma, these 8 types of beautiful, wholesome chittas, the main way in which they produce their results is by producing the rebirth consciousness in the next existence, or in an existence after that.
Part of the reason I'm asking is experientially, if I have wholesome thoughts and or behavior, it results frequently, not always, in increasing the frequency of wholesome thoughts and behavior. And you're saying that across lifetimes it's resultant, but it's not a root anymore.
When
am I sorry? The look on your faces, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe let us suspend the question for a while.
No problem.
I think the questions might get answered as we go along. And unless there's an urgent question, I want to get into the next section now, because this is where we start getting into the sort of interesting territory. So far we've been covering the territory that we're normally familiar with in our ordinary lives. Now we come to it's called the fine material sphere consciousness. This is called the Rupa Vichara Cheetahs. So these are Cheetahs, states of mind that are typical not of our ordinary human existence or even of the sense sphere realm of existence. These are the Cheetahs that are typical of the beings in the form realm or the fine material realm. Sometimes it's called the Brahma world. You know, if you remember the three primary planes of existence, we have the sense sphere plane, which includes the lower worlds like the hells, the animal realm, the realm of the ghosts, the hungry ghosts, and then still within the sense sphere realm, the more positive realms, the human realm, and the 6 lower or sense sphere heavenly realms. And then above the highest heavenly realm, the highest sense sphere heavenly realm, there's like a thick wall or a door, let's say a heavy metal door, which says, in order to get through that door, you have to have, like I have this key with an electronic signal. You know, to get into this building, I put that key over an electronic sensor, and then the door opens. Okay, so the sort of door into that fine material realm or the form realm is the attainment of these special meditative states as a human being, the meditative states called in Pali the jhanas, or in Sanskrit the dhyanas, the meditative absorptions, or the very deep levels of samadhi. So that is the second major plane of existence. And then even above the jhanas, there are 4 other even subtler realms of existence called the formless or immaterial realms, where there's no material form at all. And then in order to get into those realms, even if you have the jhanas and you put your key across, the door won't open. To get into those realms, you need what are called the arupa jhanas, or the arupa samapatis. That is the meditative attainments without form, the non-material meditative attainments. Okay, so let us now consider the case of how one goes about. Okay, now I spoke about the entrance, the key for entering those realms are either the jhanas or the formless meditative attainments. But the jhanas and the formless meditative attainments can be achieved, have to be achieved to get there by human beings. So when we have yogis practicing deep meditation and going into the jhanas, their cheetahs are not the cheetahs of the form of the sense sphere realm. But while they're in the jhana, their cheetahs are the cheetahs that are typical of the beings in the fine material realm. And if the yogi, the meditator, goes even into deeper samadhi, so they reach the formless or immaterial attainments, then their cheetahs are the cheetahs that are typical of the beings in the formless realms of existence. And those cheetahs, say the cheetahs of the jhanas, those Cheetahs create the karma that tends to rebirth in the fine material realm. So all of the deities in the fine material realm got there as human beings by practicing the jhanas. And then the deities or divine beings in the formless or non-material realms, they got there as human beings by practicing the non-material or formless jhanas while in a human body. Okay, so now we'll come to the way of developing the fine material sphere, wholesome types of consciousness. Okay, these are achieved by practicing the systems of meditation that lead to those types of attainments. And I have to add, this is probably an important point, that the jhanas and the formless or immaterial meditations are not special and unique to the Buddha Dharma. Like before the Buddha appeared in ancient India, probably going back to the time of the Upanishads and continuing, in the non-Buddhist meditative circles during the Buddha's time, in later centuries, even today, the Hindu yogis, maybe there will be ancient China Taoist yogis, maybe Christian mystics, achieve these states and generate these states of consciousness. And as a result, they can be reborn into the form realm or into the formless immaterial realm. So though the Buddha practiced these meditations, this was not something unique to the Buddha's teaching. Okay, so suppose now we have a yogi or meditator, whether Buddhist, non-Buddhist, who wants to achieve the jhanas. And so one engages with the system of meditation, which we call it sometimes samatha bhavana. We use that expression. Let me get my notepad. Okay, samatha bhavana, which means the development of calmness or tranquility, or samadhi bhavana, the development of samadhi. And so one takes up usually a simple object, because to gain this sort of what's decisive in for the attainment of the jhana is cultivating the quality of one-pointedness of mind. And so one has to remove gradually cause the thoughts to subside, gradually suppress the activity of thought. And so one will take up a very simple object. It could be the breath, the touch sensation of the breath as one is breathing in and out, or in certain meditative circles, there's an object which is called a Casilla. This can be like a disc which is formed, and then it could be, sometimes it will be filled with clay, and then we call this the earth Casilla, because it's sort of representing the earth element. Or one could use a bowl of water, that will be the water Casilla, or the disc can be colored, like red or blue, white, yellow. And so one will put the disc a short distance in front of one, and then you sit and you look at the disc and you just focus the mind on, say, the color. Let's just suppose one takes the blue Casilla. So one has that blue disc in front, and so one is just focusing the mind. Blue, 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 blue. For this I need a PhD in philosophy. Blue, blue, blue. And then all of these sort of distracting thoughts arise, but we just let them go their own way. And one goes on focusing, and it can be like a long period. It's not that you just sit down and this is all going to happen, in one session. So it's a matter of gradually working to eliminate the 5 hindrances, the 5 obstacles, like sensual desire, ill will or anger, drowsiness, restlessness, and doubt. And then as the mind starts to focus on the device, at a certain point it said that you could see the blue disc as clearly with your mind's eye as with your physical eye. So then you don't have to rely on the physical object anymore, but you just can close the eyes and focus on blue, 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 and you could see the blue disc. Okay, and now these 5 hindrances are getting suppressed, and then that blue object is becoming clearer, more radiant, more luminous. And as one is practicing in this way, one is strengthening certain factors, which in Pali we call them Vitakka and Vichara. Here in this book they're translated as initial application and sustained application. So initial application is the mental factor that, in a sense, directs the mind to the object and sort of plunges the mind into the object. And vichara is that mental factor that sustains the mind on the object and that examines the object. Okay, and then as the hindrances fall away and these factors become stronger, then there will arise a kind of joy, even a bliss or an ecstatic bliss, as the wandering thoughts fall away and the mind is sustained on the object, then this joy arises. And that is called Petey. I know this is the Chinese shi. Okay, and then there's a feeling that comes. The feeling is Suka. Pleasure or happiness. It's pleasant feeling. And then going along with this, the factor that's keeping the mind on the object, this one-pointedness of mind. And so these 5 mental qualities are called the jhana factors. And when they reach a certain degree of strength, then the mind undergoes a transition. Sort of, initially the mind is sort of stable and focused, well-focused, not moving, well-focused on its blue disc, visualizing that luminous blue disc. And then at a certain point, the mind rises to a different level of consciousness and becomes fully absorbed in the object. And with that, the mind has entered, or we would say that the meditator has entered the first jhana. But in Abhidhamma language, we would say that a Cheetah of the first jhana has arisen. And so that is what is being described. If we go to the passage now on page 52, this is section 18, Fine Material Sphere, Wholesome Consciousness. Okay, so just to get familiar, we could read together out loud. Vitakka Vichara, Petey Suka, Kakuta Sahitam, Pattama Jhana, Kusala Cheetah. Okay, so that is the first jhana, which has these 5 factors. Okay, now, is everybody familiar with the jhanas from the suttas, the way the jhanas are? Who's not familiar with jhanas as explained in the suttas? Anybody? So you've all come across then the formula for the jhanas in the suttas, and you'll see in the suttas, or the suttas always speak about 4 jhanas. And so according to the sutta scheme, when you pass from the first jhana to the second jhana, what happens is that these 2 factors fall away. Vitakka and Vichara fall away together. Okay, but now you see the Abhidhamma uses a finer method of sort of psychological analysis, because Vitakka and Vichara are separate mental factors. So they're closely associated. So probably in the sutta scheme, skilled meditators, as they advance, they can eliminate Vitakka and Vichara together. But there might be meditators who go more slowly, or maybe very skilled meditators who can notice the difference between Vitakka and Vichara and want to experiment eliminating one while keeping the other. And so in the Abhidhamma, we have 5 jhanas in which there's a new second jhana which has Vichara but no Vitakka. I just want to do this quickly. I should have used columns. Okay, I'll skip that for now. Okay, so now we go to the second jhana. Vichara Petey Suke Kakuta Sahitam Dutiya Jhana Kusala Cheetah. Okay, so we have a meditator now who's attained the first jhana, and now he or she, they've mastered this jhana, they've become very thoroughly familiar with it, and either maybe they know the Buddha's discourses, and they know about the second, third, fourth jhana, or they know that there are states, higher, more concentrated states beyond the first jhana. And so they continue with their practice of concentration. Not just, they don't remain satisfied with the first jhana, but they want to eliminate this vitakka, because they see it's a relatively coarse factor. And so they go on with their practice, and when the practice matures, then, then vitakka falls away, and the mind enters the second jhana. Or we could say there arises a cheetah belonging to the second jhana, the cheetah of the second jhana. And that cheetah is connected with vichara, that sustained application. It has piti, the joy, Here it's translated zest, which I don't like, but what to do? Okay, this joy or rapture, it has that happiness or pleasant feeling and the one-pointedness. Okay, so now we're taking a very skilled samadhi meditator. So the meditator now masters the second jhana and sees that vichara is too much activity in vichara. So they want to get rid of vichara. They go on with their practice. And then when their practice matures, vichara drops out. And now they have the third jhana. So here we have Petey. You recite Petey. Suke Kakuta. Sahitang. Tatya jhana. Kusala Cheetah. Okay, so here we have the Cheetah that has joy, pleasant feeling, one-pointedness. Okay, now the meditator wants to go further because joy, of course, it's a delightful state, but for somebody who's aspiring for really stable, tranquil, meditative samadhi, that joy becomes felt as a little disturbing. So they want to get rid of the joy, and so they continue the practice, and when it matures, the joy drops around, and there arises the Cheetah of the fourth jhana. So here we have Suke Kakuta, Sahitang, Chatuta jhana, Kusala Cheetah. So here we have the wholesome Cheetah of the fourth jhana with pleasant feeling and one-pointedness of mind. Just two of those factors are left. But now, the pleasant feeling, though it's a happy feeling, very pleasant, but again, it's a little bit coarse compared to the neutral feeling, that extremely peaceful feeling of the deeper level of samadhi. And so the meditator goes on with the practice until the Suka drops out and gets replaced by Upekkha. And so here we have Upekkha Kakuta, Sahitang, Panchama jhana, Kusala Cheetah. Okay, so that is the fifth jhana in the Abhidhamma system. And so of these five jhanas that we have in the Abhidhamma system, the first is the same as the first of the Sutta system. The second is something newly introduced in the Abhidhamma. The third Abhidhamma jhana is the second of the Sutta system. The fourth Abhidhamma jhana is the third in the Sutta system. And the fifth Abhidhamma jhana is the fourth in the Sutta system. Okay, so those jhana cheetahs that arise in a meditator practicing, excuse me, through the through the practice of meditation in this life, so those are the wholesome cheetahs. And now we come to the fine material sphere resultant cheetahs. And you can see, by way of the formulations, that the formulations are exactly the same as for the Kusala cheetahs. The only difference is that they're called Vipaka cheetahs. So what are those Vipaka cheetahs? These are the cheetahs that arise as the results of the jhanas in the process of rebirth. And these cheetahs are the basic subliminal cheetahs for the beings in the fine material realm of existence, also called the form realm. And so the beings in the form realm, when they take rebirth there, their rebirth consciousness, which continues as the underlying, deep underlying flow of consciousness, is a result of the jhana that they created or that they attained in their human existence. So say we have a yogi who practices, let us say he gains the third jhana as a human being. He has some degree of mastery over that jhana, not just once in a while he attains it and loses it, but he's able to stabilize that jhana. Okay, then he passes away, and that jhana consciousness is very powerful. So that jhana, at the time of death, it takes over the role of determining the rebirth. And when the rebirth takes place, the first moment of consciousness, that being is going to be reborn in the form realm, and the first moment of consciousness will be a resultant third jhana consciousness. And then that resultant consciousness will continue through the course of the life at that deep subliminal level, all the ways up to the time of death of that being in the form realm. If it's a being, say, a person who achieves the fifth jhana as a human being, then they'll be reborn in a still higher level within the form realm. Okay, then we come to the fine material sphere functional consciousness. And by now you could probably guess what are these five types of functional jhana consciousness? What? Right, exactly. Because if you read the suttas, you see sometimes it says that the Buddha sat down or Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahakassapa sat down and they entered into the first jhana, second, third, fourth jhana. not five jhanas, but the four jhanas. Okay, so the Buddhas and Arhats, they don't have to do any more work in developing wisdom, but if you're a Buddha, it's supposed to be a lot of activity. You have to go teaching, and then people are coming and saying, Bhante, I have this problem, that problem, and then there's the one whose child died, Bhante, bring my child back to life. And then you're the head of the monastic order, and the monks in that building are fighting, and you try to bring them together, and they don't want to listen to your advice. So being a Buddha, not easy job. And even being Arhat, you still have to get a lot of invitations for danas, alms offerings, for teaching engagements. If you're a head of a group, you still have to teach the group and regulate them. Oh my God, what am I going to do? So they have to enjoy some peace of mind. They don't have the unwholesome cheetahs, no greedy attached to gain and honor, no anger when the disciples are not listening to them, but still it's a lot of trouble, So from time to time they want to enjoy, to sort of settle into that beautiful, sort of blissful, tranquil, higher consciousness. And so when they do that, that will be through, or could be through the jhanas. Okay, so in this way we have five types of jhana consciousness which occur in three modes. either as the wholesome consciousness when non-arahats attain the jhanas, as the resultants when the jhana consciousness brings rebirth into the different levels of the form realm, and then the jhanas as practiced by the Buddhas and the arahats. Okay, now, as I indicated before, there's a whole domain or sphere of consciousness even beyond the jhanas, still in the range of samadhi bhavana, samatha bhavana. This is not yet bringing in the wisdom, but this is, maybe we could call this intensifying and deepening the level of concentration. And so we have a meditator who's mastered the fifth jhana, let us say on the blue kasina, that circular blue disc. And now he knows about the formless or immaterial attainments and wants to experience them. Okay, so this is the way it's done. This is according to the meditation manuals. Okay, one enters into the fifth jhana on the blue kasina, and now one perceives that kasina in the meditative absorption as having a certain size, and now one starts expanding the size of the blue kasina, making it bigger and bigger and bigger until that blue is covering the entire, like it seems to be covering the entire inner field of inner vision. So everything one sees inwardly is covered with that blue, that extent of blue. Okay, then one makes the determination or decision to focus not on the blue, but let the blue drop away and focus only on the space, focusing on the space that the blue expanse has been occupying. And so as one does this, at a certain point when one develops enough strength of samadhi, the blue disappears and all that remains is the infinite space that was covered by the blue. And so that would mark the attainment of the first consciousness, the first wholesome Cheetah of the immaterial sphere. So let's just recite the four immaterial Cheetahs. It's very big words because they're compound. So akas. Let me just find a good breaking point. Oh, I'm on page 60. Akasan anchayatana kusala chitta. Okay. Akasanan chayatana kusala chittam. Okay, the next one. Vinyanan chayatana kusala chittam. Akinchanya ayatana kusala chittam. Neva sanyan asanya ayatana kusala chittam. Okay, so these are the four formless or immaterial meditative attainments. And each attainment is actually a particular kind of Cheetah. So the first is called, we have the translation here, the wholesome consciousness that pertains to the base of infinite space. Okay, so in this state of consciousness, or in this meditative attainment, the object is this inwardly visualized inwardly perceived infinite space. Okay, now suppose the meditator masters that and wants to go further. And to go further with the immaterial attainments, there's no more dropping out of other mental factors. There's no changing of the mental factors. The mental factors are the same as in the fifth jhana. But what changes is the object. One goes from relatively coarse to subtler objects. Okay, so suppose the meditator has now attained the base of infinite space. So with his mind, he can sort of see this infinity of space in the meditative attainment. And there's no thoughts in this attainment. Thinking has been dropped a long time ago. Okay, but now what the meditator does, he'll realize that that since he's perceiving space as infinite, that the consciousness that's aware of space must also be infinite. So instead of focusing on the infinite space, he'll focus on that consciousness that's aware of the infinite space. And so when the attainment takes place, then it becomes the attainment of the base of infinite consciousness. Okay, now after mastering this attainment, now the meditator wants to go to the third stage. And so instead of focusing on the consciousness itself, what he focuses on, this is called the base of nothingness. But it doesn't, I think it's a bit misleading, nothingness. It doesn't mean that there's absolutely nothing at all, but it means that one is focusing on the aspect of that infinite consciousness of having no obstruction, that there's nothing sort of concrete there. So call it maybe complete lack of anything concrete in that infinite consciousness. I know this sounds very abstract, and I don't know how simpler way to explain it. But this is the way the text explained. And so one focuses upon that, call it the non-obstructive or unobstructed nature of the infinite consciousness. And then that becomes the object for the third formless meditative absorption. And then the fourth meditative absorption, the base of neither perception nor non-perception, it's said that to reach that attainment, one takes as the object the consciousness or the Cheetah of the third formless meditation. Please don't ask me questions about this. I'm just pretty much reciting or echoing back what the books say about it. And this is called the base of neither perception nor non-perception, because the consciousness or the perception in the state has become so subtle, so refined, that you can't say that it's present, and yet it's not completely absent. So it's neither completely present nor completely absent. And this is said to be, amongst all of the kinds of mundane or worldly states of consciousness possible, this is the highest state of mundane consciousness, the highest, or let us say the most intense point of mental concentration. Well, let us say it's the highest degree of unification of consciousness. Okay, so those are the wholesome types of immaterial sphere of consciousness. Then there's the immaterial sphere resultant consciousness. Do you know what those are? I think you know what they are already. Notice the names are exactly the same, except they're called vipaka chittas, resultant consciousness. Okay, so there are four. There is the formless or immaterial realm of existence, and that has 4 levels. The 4 levels are called the realm of infinite space, the realm of infinite consciousness, the realm of nothingness, the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. And remember the key, which is the way to enter the realms. So the wholesome chittas, that is the key. And when you passing away, and if you have that key, that becomes the means for rebirth into those realms. And so if you achieve any of these 4 types of wholesome immaterial consciousness, then the one that you have the greatest mastery over, that will determine rebirth into the corresponding realm of existence. And then the resultant consciousness, that becomes the rebirth consciousness and the base level consciousness within that realm. Okay, and then we have the immaterial sphere of functional consciousness. Those are the Kriya Chittas. And what are the Kriya Chittas? The functional consciousness? What? Right, exactly. So when Buddhas and the Buddha and the Arhats, when they want to go into to experience the immaterial attainments, then their chittas don't create any karma tending to rebirth in those realms. So they can enter those attainments and come out without any traces. And so those are just called the functional chittas. Okay, so now we've gone through, we've covered a lot of material in this class so far. Okay, so we've covered the wholesome sense sphere chittas. Actually, we've covered the beautiful sense sphere chittas, the fine material sphere chittas, and the immaterial sphere chittas. Now, all of those chittas that we've covered so far are called mundane chittas. The Pali word is lokiya, I think. So they're chittas. It's not mundane in the sense that going to the bar or chatting with friends, playing cards. Not mundane in that sense. But even these very exalted states of mind are mundane in that they're still sort of confined within the boundaries of the conditioned world. They're still part of except for the functional chittas of the arhats, they're still part of the fabric of samsara, the round of birth and death. So even the jhanas and the immaterial meditations, if one doesn't go further in developing panya or prajna, wisdom, those states of mind just bring rebirth, say, into the form realm, and then you spend hundreds and thousands of aeons in the form realm, and then at the end of maybe 1,000 aeons, you're sitting absorbed in samadhi, and somebody comes over and sort of shrugs your shoulder and says, "Guess what? You look up and you say, what is it? He says, time to go. Then next thing you know it, the mind blacks out, and then you find yourself in the womb of a mother, and then coming out 9 months later, wah, wah, wah. Then it's your mother taking you to kindergarten, then your first crush in junior high school or high school. Then you're applying for college, then work, and marriage, or divorce, and arguments, all over again. So still within samsara. Okay, so how does one get out of it? That brings us to the next group of Cheetahs. These are called the Lokutara Cheetahs, the supramundane or world-transcending states of consciousness. And these states of consciousness can't be attained only on the basis of samadhi, but after gaining some level of samadhi, maybe even not as deep as jhana, maybe not even the first jhana, but one has to develop insight, vipassana, which gives rise to panya, or Sanskrit, prajna. Okay, so the insight here would be arises through the contemplation, not of a fixed object, but of the ever-changing flow of experience. And so one is observing experience and then being able to investigate the experience in terms of the 5 khandha or skandha, and then being able to see the 5 aggregates as subject to arising and passing away. And then when we see the arising and passing away, that's the insight into the impermanence of the 5 aggregates. And then from the insight into impermanence comes the insight into dukkha. Often we translate dukkha as suffering, but it doesn't mean that everything is suffering. But one sees the 5 aggregates are unsatisfactory. And then going further, one investigates the 5 aggregates are not myself. They're not mine, not the truly existent I. And so one is seeing the 5 aggregates as being impermanent, suffering, non-self. And so the insight goes deeper and deeper, becomes clearer and clearer. And now one is aspiring for liberation. And then at a certain point, if one's faculties are strong enough and one's merits are great enough and all of one's other qualities are mature enough, then the mind makes a particular breakthrough from the sphere of conditioned reality to taking as its object the unconditioned nibbana, nirvana. So this is very hard to explain, because usually we think nirvana is just the blissful or peaceful mental state. But nibbana in the Abhidhamma is an actual reality, a truly existent state. And with this experience, for just one mind moment, just a split second, the mind breaks through and experiences nibbana itself. And that first breakthrough, that one mind moment, is called the path consciousness of stream entry. And the path consciousness of stream entry, that's here sotapatti mala, sotapatti magga, with that breakthrough to the path of stream entry, the mind cuts off permanently 3 fetters that have kept us, that are keeping us in bondage to samsara. One is the view of a self, the view of a truly existent self. The second is doubt. And the third is clinging to rules and observances in the belief that just by following rules and undergoing certain observances, one could achieve liberation. And of course, the most important of these is the view of self. That is permanently eradicated. Okay, then the path of stream entry is followed immediately by its result. The result is the Sotapatti Palachita. That's the supramundane resultant consciousness. So there follows the fruition consciousness of stream entry. So for a couple of moments, it said for 2 or 3 moments, one experiences that kind of bliss of release from those fetters. So the path, the Magga, the way I illustrate this in my own thinking, we have like a prisoner whose arms are tied, hands are tied by certain iron chains, and he's been wearing them away. When the prison guards aren't looking, he's wearing them away against the stone wall. That is like developing the insight. Then he's pulling more and more strongly on the chains. Then at a certain point, he exerts himself, the chain breaks. That's like the Magga, where the fetters are cut off. And then he feels, my arms are freed. So that is like the fruition. Okay, so that is the path and the fruit of stream entry. And when one reaches the stage of stream entry, if one doesn't go any further in this life, then at most one will be reborn 7 more times within samsara. And so a person who reaches stream entry is now bound for final liberation. They're not yet free from samsara, but beyond 7 more rebirths, there won't be any more existences beyond 7 more. Okay, but let's take the case of a meditator who wants to go further. So, many meditators, if they reach stream entry, they think, okay, I've done it. That's enough for now. But we're taking somebody who wants to reach the end. So he goes back and continues to develop insight, aiming for a higher attainment. When the insight reaches maturity and all of the other faculties are strong enough, they come to the second breakthrough. And that is the breakthrough to the path of once returning. Okay, the stage of once returning, it won't cut off any new defilements, but it weakens greed, hatred, and delusion to the extent that one will have only 1 more rebirth back into the sense sphere realm of existence. And I should also add that for the stream enterer and once returner, though they come back to the sense sphere realm of existence, but they will never take rebirth in the lower realms. No more rebirth, no possibility of rebirth in hell, as an animal, or as a hungry ghost. So the rebirth will be either into the human realm or into the heavenly realms. Okay, then the path of the once returner will be followed immediately by its fruit 2 or 3 mind moments of the fruit. Okay, but we have the meditator who wants to go further. So this meditator, again, he undertakes the practice of insight. His faculties are very strong. And so when all of the conditions come together, a third breakthrough takes place. That is the path of the non-returner. And the path of the non-returner will cut off 2 of the fetters, the fetter of sensual desire and ill will. And those are the fetters that bind a person to the sense-sphere realm of existence. And so the non-returner will never again come back to the sense-sphere realm, but they're not yet freed completely from samsara, but they will take rebirth into the fine material realm. And then they'll reach complete liberation within the fine material realm. Okay, but now we want the meditator who's going to reach the final end of the path, and this is one who has very strong spiritual faculties, and so they take up the practice of insight, and now everything comes together, and they attain the path consciousness of arhatship. This is the arahata magga Cheetah. And with that Cheetah has the function of eradicating the 5 subtle fetters. Those are the fetters of desire for rebirth in the fine material realm, the desire for rebirth in the formless realm, a very subtle type of conceit that remains even in the non-returners, a very subtle kind of restlessness, and then ignorance. Even the last traces of ignorance are eradicated. So that is the arahata magga Cheetah, the path consciousness of arhatship, and then that will be followed by a few moments, 2 or 3 moments, it said, of the fruition consciousness of arhatship. Okay, so when we take the 4 paths, the 4 fruits, then we have the 8 kinds of supramundane consciousness. And I should add that this is a rather technical point. Again, if you find this difficult to understand, don't worry about it. Okay. The fruition consciousness of each of the paths first arises right after its respective path for 2 or 3 moments. Now, the path consciousness is never repeated in the course of the existence. If you reach, say, path of stream entry, you never go through the path of stream entry again. Because the function of the path is to cut off defilements. When those defilements are cut off, you're freed from them. But if you achieve stream entry, then you can experience the fruit any time you want in the course of your life. That fruition becomes a special meditative attainment in which the mind becomes immersed in the experience of nirvana. So if I want to, say, sit in the fruition attainment for a half an hour, I make a determination, let me enter the fruition attainment for 30 minutes, and then the mind will go for 30 minutes into that experience of nirvana, and then after 30 minutes comes out. I wanted to leave time for questions, but I've come to 5:30. 我们怎么办? Maybe if there are a few quick questions to clear up any understanding. Yeah, please. In the back.
If a person
could stand up.
Pardon?
Yeah, just stand up, then the voice will carry better.
Oh, okay. How long in the first jhana, the first time you go into the first jhana, how long do you stay in it?
Oh, this is an interesting point. According to the Abhidhamma, it says that the first time the first jhana arises, it's just a single Cheetah, just one Cheetah, then one comes out. So then one has to develop the skill to be able to extend the jhana. But then when somebody develops the skill, then they can extend the jhana so that they could remain in the jhana for hours or even days. Though I've never heard anybody who's had a jhanic experience say that I experienced it for one thought moment. So it seems this is taking account of maybe somebody who's striving very diligently, and then the mind just goes into that jhana consciousness just for that split second, and then comes out. And so they not even fully aware that they've entered the jhana. That would only come, I think, after they develop the ability to extend it for some time. Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you mention about attaining the fine material sphere, also the immaterial sphere, and also being reborn in those spheres, I don't know if you can say much about, are those, if you're reborn in that sphere, are you still manifesting as a human being, or is that like the realm
No. Those are different realms of existence.
Okay.
Yeah, the human realm is one realm within the sense sphere realm of existence. Yeah.
Is that like the realm of the gods that is talked about? Sometimes gods and clashing titans, or
the gods who fight with the titans, those are relatively lower. Gods have a relatively lower realm in the sense sphere. Yeah. But when we get beyond the sense sphere into the fine material realm, there's no fighting there. It's extremely peaceful. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's extremely blissful. Yeah.
Okay. Huh.
And then the beings in the immaterial realm or formless realm don't have physical bodies. It's just mind and mental factors there.
I know sometimes people refer to spirits or guides. Is that possibly that? Or I know often people are talking about a lot of different things when they talk about spirits.
Yeah, it could be. There could be spirits that are sort of, I don't know. Yeah. But I would say that there are beings who have been human beings who pass away. And their consciousnesses, even with subtle physical bodies, are still hanging around close to the human realm. So they're not yet in the heavenly realms. Even the texts speak about yakshas and bhutas and.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Here. In the fine material realm.
Yeah,
And from that point, he can become liberated.
Yeah.
But does he go back into a human birth to become an arhat?
No. They're called non-returner because they don't come back into the human realm or into any realm with it. They don't come into any state within the sense sphere realm. But in the fine material realm itself, they achieve final liberation.
So somebody who becomes, as a human, becomes an arhat, didn't go through being reborn in that final...
No. If a human being becomes an arhat, they won't be reborn.
They just went through 1, 2, 3, and to 4 as a human.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, then they're liberated within the human realm itself.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll have to end for the day. And Reverend Jinchuan distributed the sheet with the verses for the sharing of the merits, and so we can recite those together. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sattanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya avichihetato etantare satakayupapana rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay.